today's video, I thought I'd focus on my diagnosis journey, and if you're new to this channel, give you a little bit of background as to why I believe that I am very good at one thing, and that is being a patient, which is a sad thing, but something that I can share what I've learned along the way. And I think my story gives us a little bit of credibility. So let's rewind. I was a happy and healthy child and had a really lovely childhood until the age of 10, when I came in from school one day and I collapsed on the hall floor with what I can only describe as absolutely extreme exhaustion. But this wasn't just a case of needing a little nap, this was collapsing on the floor and physically not being able to get up. I was so weak and tired. And very strangely, my mum recognised this symptom as one that she'd had 5 years earlier. And as the evening progressed, and I started to develop sweats and shivers, and then I started throwing up, and then this slight dry cough started to emerge, she phoned the GP and said, "Hi, I think my daughter has pneumonia." To which the GP replied, "I'm sure it's just a weak cough." And if any of you are going through a diagnosis journey at the moment, this is probably something you can relate to. We saw this pattern emerge again and again and again. And sadly, on this occasion and all the subsequent ones, it turned out that I had pneumonia. After that first bout of pneumonia, a bizarre concoction of symptoms all started to develop, and they were affecting every part of my body. So I had a period for 6 weeks, then no periods at all. I was eating but losing weight dramatically for no apparent reason. I was developing chest infections all the time, living as the years went on prophylactic antibiotics. I was having sweats and shivers, my hormone levels were all over the place. I developed a condition on my feet where they burnt at night and they turned bright red and veins would all fill with blood, and we had to raise them on 4 pillows and spend the night bathing them in baths of ice. My sleep was also severely disrupted generally. I wasn't sleeping a lot of the time, and my whole body was basically just all over the place. But these symptoms were so nondescript. They didn't fit into one category. And if any of you are struggling with a diagnosis at the moment, often I find when I speak to people that it's the very fact of not fitting in a box, not ticking the medical text box, that means patients find it so difficult to be diagnosed. And that was exactly what happened to me. So I had this weird array of symptoms, and then the next one that came along was my tummy just started growing and growing and growing. I had this skinny frame, but this large rock-solid tummy that was sort of doughy in texture, and it got to the point where I was around 15 and I'd be going to medical appointments and the doctors would be asking me if I was in fact pregnant, which wasn't the case. I was regularly asked at medical appointments whether this was psychological, whether I was stressed, whether I needed to change my diet, and maybe I needed to cut out all those cokes and biscuits that I was eating, and it couldn't have been further from the truth. By this stage, I tried every diet going, I was trying to eat really healthily, I'd been put on liquid diets for months on end, and nothing was working. Even when I drank liquid, this tummy would expand. So in the end, we pushed for more scans, and I got to have MRIs, CTs, barium meals, ultrasounds, because by this point, the doctors were starting to recognise that whatever was going on here was not normal. This tummy was just getting bigger. And eventually, I was under Great Ormond Street Hospital, and they said they'd never seen anything like it, and they needed a surgeon to have a look inside. So at age 16, my GCSE year, I was admitted to hospital. What I was told would just be a little bit of investigative surgery and laparoscopy to have a look inside and see what was going on. But during the procedure, the surgeon came out to my mum and dad and said that my terminal ileum in the small intestine was completely blocked with undigested food, and he was going to have to do an intestinal resection. So I came out of the operating theatre having had part of my intestine removed on a morphine pump, feeling absolutely horrendous. And the surgeon said there was something seriously wrong here, but he still hadn't seen anything like it. What he had noticed was some white spots on the lining of my intestine, but nobody knew what that meant. Fast forward over the next few years, the tummy got a bit better after the operation, but then continued to grow again, and these debilitating pneumonias got progressively worse. By the time I reached university, I was told that I'd got all of these different conditions, none of which properly fitted the full picture. Over time, I'd been told I'd got blood cancer, I'd been told I'd got cystic fibrosis, I'd been told I'd got polycystic ovaries, I'd been told I'd got Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I'd been told I'd got POTS, but none of them kind of completed everything that was happening to me. Somehow during this time, I got into Oxford University, which for me was an absolute dream come true. Everyone had said you can't do it, the teachers at school had said don't bother, you're too ill. I was missing huge bouts of my education. But during this time, studying had become my unwavering focus. It was the one thing I could do from the sofa. I could sit there with my books, I could read, I could write, I could use my brain, but I didn't have to exert any physical energy. And over time, we'd come to realise that it was physical energy being exerted which led to pneumonia. Now the doctor said this didn't happen. I'm not talking about physical energy like going on a run or going to the gym. I'm talking climbing a flight of stairs or walking to the shops at the end of the road. That was enough to start developing the dry cough, various different symptoms, sweats, shivers, nausea, eventually ending up in A&E requiring IV antibiotics. And for me, this was becoming more and more of a frequent occurrence. It was during my second year at university when things really hit rock bottom. I ended up in hospital again on IV antibiotics for 2 weeks of meropenem, but I was told that the antibiotics just weren't as effective as they once had been and they weren't being successful in treating the infection. By this point, I'd been told that every test had been done, there were no more tests left, and the antibiotics weren't working. So though the doctors didn't know what it was, they did know that whatever it was now looking like it was going to kill me. And the last thing on the cards was palliative care. So that was a really, really low point in my health journey. But it was on this admission that my mum pleaded with the medics to do more tests. She knew that this was in some way a physical illness that responded to antibiotics. So what could that be? One of the consultants on the ward rounds pushed for a test for tuberculosis. Apparently she was told that it was a waste of time and there was no chance that it was that. But this test was the first test in 13 years to come back positive. And when I got the phone call at home when I'd been discharged to tell me that, I was filled with this very strange mixture of overwhelming relief, because when we looked this up, it was the first thing that seemed to fit all of the symptoms. And also horror, upset, really frightened, really scared, and petrified about what the word tuberculosis meant. Like, I didn't know much about it, but I knew that it wasn't something you wanted to have, and I knew that there was a stigma surrounding it because it was deemed to be highly infectious, which mine never was, because it turned out it was in my intestine, and it was from drinking unpasteurized milk. So it was a different sort of tuberculosis to the ones people generally catch in their lungs. But at this point, my emotions were all over the place, but I finally had a diagnosis. Now the next part of the journey certainly wasn't easy, getting the treatment, being on the treatment, and subsequently the TB returning, which is something I'll cover in a later video. But at this point I just want to focus on the diagnosis. I had such a long journey, 13 years of being seriously ill, in and out of hospital, all from my childhood, my teens, and then my time at university. And I learned some tips along the way that if you're going through this right now, I'd really like to share with you. So my tip number one would be always take somebody to an appointment with you. You are ill, remember, and it can be really hard to remember anything. It can be really hard to remember to ask the right questions, and it can be an emotional time. It's long enough waiting to get an appointment with a medic, and when you finally sit down and get it, you want to use that to the best of your ability. So if you have someone there who can be the best possible advocate for you, who can also then discuss the appointment with you before, plan what you want to say, and discuss it with you afterwards to reflect on it, go over things, and create a bit of a plan moving forward, I find that that can be so helpful. My next tip would be take a notepad. The doctors might not love you for it, but as I said before, it can be really difficult to remember everything that's discussed in an appointment, and there are things that you might want to look up afterwards. So write notes, or get the person who goes with you to write some notes, write the name down of anything complicated that you don't quite understand. Next, I would say write a list. Hospital appointments can feel overwhelming. As I say, you wait a long time for them. And I find it that often doctors will start by asking for your medical history. So writing this up beforehand, clearly and concisely, and being able to hand it over to them is a way to save time in the appointment. And if you've had a really long, traumatic, complicated medical history like I've had, it can take up the whole appointment, and that's just not a good use of time. So medical history written up, medicines, tablets, etc. also written up on a list which can be handed over. And finally, I also write a list of symptoms and what is currently going on that is most bothering me, that I want to use that appointment to try to get some help with. And I find that structuring the appointment in that way means the best use of time. It means I'm not rambling and all over the place, and ends up hopefully with a better outcome. The biggest thing my journey has taught me is knowledge is power. It's really hard to have a conversation with the medics about your condition or about your possible diagnosis if you don't really understand what they're talking about, or if you don't go with any suggestions. So often I find that if they don't know, they simply put it down to stress, or they tell you that it doesn't fit the medical textbook and you're a medical mystery. And I don't know about you, but I got completely and utterly fed up of being a medical mystery. I still am, I don't want to be one, but the only way to solve that mystery is to take matters into your own hands. So start doing your own research. Look up on Google, look up on the internet which categories your symptoms fits into. Look up any possible diagnoses you think fits you. Talk to people on social media. There are so many people out there posting about their symptoms, posting about what's been going on with them. And if we hadn't done our own research, if my mum hadn't stayed up relentlessly, and I'm talking night after night after night, for which I'm so lucky, we never would have ended up reaching this diagnosis. The medics would have given up on me a very long time ago. So taking matters into your own hand, or getting your family or friends or somebody close to you to do that for you, really can make such a difference. Turn up to medical appointments, you turn up informed. And I find that doctors are much more receptive to talking about your ideas, talking about possible diagnoses, if what you're saying actually makes sense. Whereas if you just go with random suggestions you haven't really thought through, you haven't really researched, they'll be very quickly to tell you that Google Doctor is not the answer. So knowledge is power, guys. And finally, don't give up. This is the biggest piece of advice I can give you. At times you might feel at absolute rock bottom. At times on my journey I certainly have done. But if I'd have given up, I never would have got my tuberculosis diagnosis. And when you have a condition that is difficult to diagnose, it can be so easy to just be passed from one ologist to the next with no answers. And people can just keep telling you that you're this medical mystery and they can't get to the bottom of it. Or they might start telling you that you're just stressed, or it's psychological, or that perhaps you've got, I don't know, I was told things like I've got ME, and it just didn't completely fit the bill. There was something else going on here. Sometimes vague diagnoses that are given just don't feel right. And along the way, if I'd have accepted all the diagnoses, accepted the fact that actually there was nothing anybody could do and palliative care was the only option, I probably wouldn't still be here today. So if there's anyone around you who can keep you going, keep you motivated, keep you believing that there is an answer out there, it just hasn't been found yet, then you need that to keep striving, keep researching, and keep believing that one day things are going to get better. My journey is proof. 13 years on, I started tuberculosis treatment and I got my life back. Sadly, my life has slightly gone downhill again since, which I'll cover in another video, but I did get my life back. My life dramatically changed. And if it hadn't been for pushing for 13 years for that diagnosis, knowing there was something physically wrong with me, and proving a lot of medics wrong along the way and subsequently, then I never would have reached that place. So don't give up. I hope that those tips help. And if you are on a journey of diagnosis at the moment, I know that it can be unbelievably challenging. All you want is an answer. And you find that medics come back and say, it's so good, the tests have come back normal. And of course, none of us want to get a terrible test result, but to have something to work with when you're feeling so unwell and when you're being told you're so unwell can be all that you're after. So I completely get that that's a tough place to be. If any of you are going through that, drop me a message below, comment on the Instagram @thattillyrose, or drop me a message. Always happy to chat to you guys. And I think it's really useful to share symptoms, etc., because I found it really helpful with my adrenal insufficiency and tuberculosis, meeting and talking to people online. Subscribe for future videos. I'll be doing day in the lives, tips I've learned along the way, coping strategies, staying positive, and sending you guys all the best health vibes for the coming week.